So here we are. As I said, this is Training Accessible Meetings, and we will go ahead and dive in to our agenda. So what do we want to accomplish today? Our time together today looks like a review of learning outcomes, what I hope for all of you to be able to walk away with today after our meeting. And then we'll dive in, of course, to the topic at hand, accessible meetings. And we will explore several different categories under that topic, including understand your audience, accommodate audience needs, accessible presentation materials, meeting management techniques, choosing a platform, screen sharing and demonstrations. And then finally, of course, sharing out resources and answering any questions that anyone may have. So our learning outcomes for today include the following. First, develop a deeper understanding of your audience. Second learning outcome, evaluate your current presentation materials and determine if there are any components that could be more accessible. And finally, identify 3 to 5 meeting management techniques to start implementing in your next meeting, or perhaps reaffirming that you are already implementing many of these strategies within your current meetings. So accessible meetings, we broke this down in the agenda, but it bears repeating. We will go through, of course, understand the audience, accommodate those needs, looking at presentation materials, and I've linked to several resources within that slide as well that you can take a peek at. And then we will explore those meeting management techniques for both the host and the presenter, or excuse me, the host, presenter, and participant. And then choosing a platform. All of us here at the state primarily use Google Meet, but we will look at Microsoft Teams and Zoom and some other platforms as well that are not widely used for accessible reasons, but still I will mention those as well. And then finally, screen sharing and demonstrations. So first, understand your audience. We've got a couple of different bullet points under this category that I want to review with all of you. So first idea here or concept when you are aiming to understand your audience, you really want to think about that planning phase. And I'll talk a little bit more about what you want to do pre-meeting in a few slides from now. But first, understanding that you want to be inclusive of people who have vision, hearing, mobility, cognitive, and other disabilities when you are planning your meeting. And again, I'll kind of go over some of those techniques a little bit later. Some individuals are unable to distinguish colors and need charts and visualizations to include other ways to comprehend the graphical information. So again, reevaluating your reliance on color to distinguish importance. You want to make sure that you have other ways so that those folks can comprehend that information. Others may use a screen reader, a screen magnifier, or their computer's keyboard instead of the mouse to access and navigate content. So just thinking about what you're sharing within that meeting is accessible in many different ways. And then people who are deaf or hard of hearing may rely on speech to text translations, commonly through caption, not always, but that is usually what is utilized within virtual meetings is the captioning function. Of course, to understand speech and other meaningful sounds. And then not all platforms support screen readers, keyboard accessibility, or live or even automated captioning. So that must be taken into consideration. Again, we'll break down the different platforms a little bit later. So accommodating audience needs. So this still is under the realm of understanding your audience. And first, when you're thinking about accommodating your audience's needs, you want to think about the presentation materials and those features. So here I have linked Google Slides and PowerPoint slides. These are resources that help you think through how you make those particular assets accessible, as well as polls. And then share a link to the HTML view of your slides. This is oftentimes a preferred method for screen reader users to be able to move through your slides in an accessible manner. And then documents and breakout rooms are also highlighted. But I just want to go back here to the documents portion. So thinking about presentation materials such as Google Slides and PowerPoint slides, Word, PDF documents that you may be sharing, you want to make sure they are as accessible as possible prior to your meeting and that you're sharing those versions out with your audience. And then jumping down to polls, the polling feature is accessible to assistive technology users. However, you want to make sure to alert participants that you will be launching a poll, and you want to read through the different poll features, the questions that are being asked, for example, and you want to allow ample time for participants to answer. Of course, if you're sharing those results, which you most likely will be, make sure you read the results out. This is also helpful for folks who are joining on a mobile device as well. Oftentimes, I don't think there's a way for those folks to join that poll. So you want to give alternative ways to participate in that poll for your mobile users, such as direct message or putting their response in the chat, whatever it may be. And then, of course, breakout rooms. I think breakout rooms are a great way to create kind of smaller conversations within a bigger group, but you want to make sure that captions are turned on again in the breakout room, because they don't always carry through from the main room, as well as any ASL interpreters, American Sign Language interpreters that are invited to the meeting, making sure they get into the correct breakout room. So these are just some logistical things to be aware of when you're planning kind of the flow of your meeting, if you are going to be using breakout rooms. And then be as descriptive as possible. Tell the audience that a prompt will appear on their screen to ask them to join. Let participants know how much time they will have in the room. A countdown pop-up usually alerts folks to how much time is left, so they are aware that they're going to be brought back to that main room. Anything that's posted in the chat prior to joining a breakout room will not carry over to the chat. So I always like to encourage folks to copy down any directions that were in the chat, or maybe share a document that people can open up before joining that breakout room. So just some things to be thinking about when you're planning your meeting. So accessible presentation materials. We have several bulleted items here that walk through those presentation materials, again, linked to Google Docs and documents and Google Slides, PowerPoint in the previous slide. But thinking about some key points here when you are creating those presentation materials, you want to develop a presentation that will be accessible to all participants. Of course, as I mentioned, a couple of documents and slides and other guides have been linked both in the previous slide as well as the resource slide that you can follow, so that you can ensure to the best of your ability that those presentation materials are accessible. And then include only the key points of the presentation on slides. I must admit, some of my slides are packed full of content. So you just want to be mindful of the information that you're sharing and really getting a point those key points and using them as a guide for the conversation, and not trying to put too much in one slide, as that can be overwhelming. And then, of course, ensuring that the digital presentation materials are completely legible with large print and sharp contrasting colors. And of course, accompanying meeting materials, including presentations and handout with complete verbal description. So if you're using slides, or you have images on those slides, or an image within your presentation, videos, or other visual aids, you want to make sure that you are describing them orally for everyone in the audience to understand what exactly is on the screen. If it's not important, if it's just decorative, then that is fine, but you might as well just take the opportunity to describe what's ever on your slide when presenting virtually. And then, as I did, and as we do here within our TAP Open Office Hours, we try to be pretty diligent with sharing out those resources that we have that we're going to be sharing in the meeting. We try to put them in the agenda and, of course, the chat when we start our meeting. So that really points to this next bullet of making sure that those are shared prior to the meeting, or if not, right before the meeting starts. And then speak in well-paced and well-modulated tones. It is particularly important for presenters to monitor their rate of speech and not speak too rapidly. This could be, many people may think this is quite obvious, but for me, sometimes when I get nervous or I feel like, my time is running out, I'll start really ramping up and talking really fast, and that doesn't help the audience to comprehend what it is I'm saying. So just take your time and speak clearly, and test your microphone and make sure that folks can hear you. Of course, when you're presenting, that's very important. And then any audio component should have a text version accompanying it, open or closed captioning. This includes all training and informational videos and multimedia. I like to share videos during trainings as well, or presentations at times. And so just making sure that you are finding videos that are captioned so that it is inclusive is important to do when thinking about sharing that audio. So sticking with the theme of accommodate audience needs, we have talked about presentations, now thinking about the audio and visual. So images, of course, using alt text for any images used in the meeting slides. If you're sharing those out, we want to make sure that those folks that are going through your slides can get a sense of what any images are based on that alt text. And then, of course, any images, we kind of touched on this earlier, but any images that are used during a meeting must include an oral description of that image. It doesn't take much. Just think about sending a tweet, 125 to 145 characters, just to quickly describe that image to give everyone a sense of what is occurring in that particular image. And then video, we've touched on this a little bit, but transcripts. Google Meet offers the transcript feature. As we all know here on this call, we get the transcripts accompanied with the video recording. And then captioning. Captioning is available in Google Meet and many other platforms as well. Of course, it is automated, so sometimes there are little hiccups and inconsistencies, but overall it provides a pretty decent experience. And then audio only, thinking about maybe a podcast where you're just hearing words, you want to make sure that there's an accurate transcript for listeners who are deaf or don't easily capture all auditory information. Let's hop in now to some meeting management techniques. And first, what I'd like to do is explore from the perspective of host and presenters. So I want to touch on, when I alluded to this earlier, this is kind of that before the meeting, things to be thinking of. And I do want to mention in the last slide, or second to last slide, I have a resources list. And the second item is a how-to on accessible meetings in Google Meet. And that really breaks down what to do before, during, and after a meeting. So it's a handy checklist for everyone. So if I know this may seem like a lot of information I'm presenting today, but that how-to guide is a great guide to kind of have handy when you're planning your virtual meetings. So just a quick plug for that. So when sending out virtual meeting invites, you want to distribute the slides and other materials to attendees in advance. I know this is tricky sometimes. We're also busy, and sometimes you just don't have the materials ready weeks in advance. But the idea here is you can give folks that have accommodation needs, that may need this material in a different format, you're giving them that time to get those materials in the format that works for them. In addition, some folks like to be prepared so they can have questions or they can review this content prior to the meeting so that they don't have to spend so much cognitive ability on maintaining focus on the content at hand, as well as other meeting items that may be occurring. So this is just a good practice if you can. I know sometimes people like to surprise folks with their slides and they have really fun information that they don't want to send out too soon. And I totally get that. From an accessibility standpoint, it's just good practice to send these materials out in advance. So if you can, that is definitely needed. And then clearly state the agenda in the meeting invite, making sure that folks are aware of any role they need to play in the meeting. And then, of course, listing out what you hope to accomplish in the meeting. This is very important. Sometimes when we set meetings, myself included, I'll just start inviting guests, but I will neglect to have an agenda at all times. And this is just really helpful for all participants to understand what the expectations are of that meeting and what you hope to get out of that meeting, what will be occurring during that meeting. And then I want to touch on accommodations. So, of course, there are employees that are on our staffs amongst all of our agencies that do have accommodations in place, that have asked for accommodations during meetings. And we need to make sure as meeting hosts that those accommodations are adhered to. For example, like American Sign Language, make sure as a meeting host that you coordinate with your ADA office to ensure that ASL, an interpreter, or another accommodation, whatever accommodation is noted for that particular employee or that participant that's joining your meeting, that they will be present at that virtual meeting. And I want to point out that written English and ASL are two different languages. So having captioning for someone that requires ASL will not work. So ASL is a visual gestural language with its own grammar and syntax. And of course, written English, uses an alphabet-based system to represent words and sounds. So these are two completely different experiences. So if there is someone that is participating in your meeting, this is another thing that you should probably think about posting in your meeting invite, meaning if you need an accommodation, please reach out to and then have a contact. And then making sure that if these are internal employees, that those accommodations are tracked so that any future meetings, the employee doesn't have to continue to ask for this accommodation. So just wanted to point that out, that these are two different concepts. So providing captioning for someone that needs ASL, again, is not an appropriate workaround. Okay, so let's now continue on our journey with hosts and presenters and thinking about the techniques that they should be putting in place with their virtual meetings. As all of us know, as we started our meeting off today, we had our meeting norms. So sharing those norms is a great way to level set your meeting and provide those expectations of your audience as a host, and really helps everyone feel included and aware of how they need to conduct themselves in the meeting. And then again, we're thinking of the hosts and the presenters. Turn your camera on whenever possible. There are folks that do lip read to gain their information. So that is yet another way for them to ascertain the information that you're sharing. So if you are a host, just making sure you have your camera on, again, if possible. But indicate to your audience that having their camera on is definitely optional. And then ensure proper microphone positioning and enable noise reduction. Google Meet does that for us. When we log in, it does have that noise reduction capability. And then prepare a quiet meeting space, free of extraneous noises and sounds. We all have the occasional doorbell ring or dog barking or child laughing, and those are completely appropriate, but just do your best to provide that space for your participants. And then ensure adequate lighting, again, as the host, so everyone can have an image of you and, if needed, be able to read your lips when you are speaking. And just in general, it's good practice when you are presenting. And then, of course, you want to welcome guests and establish and enforce those meeting rules or meeting norms that were mentioned earlier, and remind people to state their name before talking. Again, this is the ability to identify folks with their name to their voice, and it's just good practice so we can find you on these on numerous tiles that are highlighted during each of our meetings. And then you want to avoid gestures to illustrate a point, such as using visual points of reference, like you'll notice over here, or if you compared this figure with that one, well, that may not be clear to your audience. So try to avoid that if possible and be as descriptive as you can. All right, thanks for sticking with me here. We're still continuing here with hosts and presenters. There's a lot, I know, but again, I'm going to point to that resource guide, that how-to guide, as you are moving through your meetings, as that kind of one-sheeter to help you. But nonetheless, these are all important things to be aware of, and I know it must feel like a lot. But again, going back to those learning outcomes, if you can just pick out 3 or 5 of these techniques that you can work toward or that you can identify that you're already doing, that's a huge win. And then you can continue to add on over time. So again, sticking with hosts and presenters here, I've got several bulleted items. Let's move through these. Inform attendees when meeting is being recorded, allowing sufficient time for individuals to turn off their camera and microphone, or disconnect from the meeting. Maybe they're not comfortable with it being recorded. You can also mention this in the meeting that you will be recording, but then perhaps state why you're recording it and who the recording will be shared out with, again, to create that safe space if the topic warrants it. And then ask participants to join, who joined by telephone, to identify themselves. Of course, their number comes across, but if they can't identify themselves so we know who's in the meeting, that was a great tactic as well. Ask whether all attendees have what they need for effective communication. Meaning, do they have the appropriate setup so they can participate verbally if they so choose? And then making sure that they have what they need in terms of accommodations, making sure that they can hear you, and that they can see the captions if needed. So just making sure and double checking that those parameters are in place. And then, of course, we've hit on this a couple times, but describe what's on the screen. And this also helps people participating via telephone or audio only. And then using plain language, avoid jargon. I have linked in the resource slide a plain language guide. This is just important, a good practice, an inclusive best practice, that you just want to use the language to get your point across. That's plain language and avoiding that jargon. And then when someone has posted something in the chat, a question perhaps, you want to read that submitter's name and then the question before answering that question. Again, just in case folks miss what's in the chat, and you want to make sure that you're identifying the person that asked that question. And then reminding participants to identify themselves before they begin to speak, right? Even if you state their name, and asking them to come off mute and ask their question, it's always best practice as a participant to also state your name once again. Again, identifying a voice to a name. That's what we're aiming for here. And then thinking, while we're on this subject of chat, and then we all love these emojis, these reactions, of course, the raise hand functionality, all of these different components cause screen reader activation, meaning the screen reader is telling the individual that's utilizing the screen reader what's happening, right? So when someone raises a virtual hand, it's going to read their entire name as well as anything that follows their name as they raise their hand. So thinking about when you are raising your hand, when you are using chat and those emojis, and being mindful of the chatter that creates with our screen reader users. So try not to use these features when someone is talking. I know that's tricky sometimes. We have a burning question that we want to post in chat, or we really want to raise our hand and add on to a point. All this is meant to do is to raise awareness that this creates more activation for our screen reader users, and just be mindful of that. And if you can hold off, please do. But if it is absolutely imperative that you raise your hand or put something in chat, of course, that is acceptable. Just asking again for that awareness. So now let's switch over. We're still under the meeting management techniques, but now through the lens of a participant. So for participants, confirm access to the meeting platform and features. Perhaps you are a regular Google Meet user, but you've been invited to a Zoom meeting or a Microsoft Teams meeting. Making sure that you are looking at the agenda, that you can access that platform. I always try to just maybe a couple minutes before look at that platform, click on the link, make sure I can get in, and then familiarize yourself with the platform controls like volume, mute, reduce noise. This is also something a host can do as well. If it's the first time that they know these participants are utilizing this platform, just letting them know and getting them acclimated to that platform, where all of these different features are, is also helpful. Of course, you want to arrive on time, maybe a little bit early, a couple minutes early. Ensure that your full name is spelled out correctly for other participants to reference. It's exciting now that we were able to change our tiles and have our preferred names listed. So that's a great win for all of us to be more inclusive and have the name that we prefer highlighted. So just making sure that that's correct. And that your pronouns are there if you so choose, of course. And then understand and follow participant rules. This goes back to those meeting norms, and just making sure that you follow those. And then you want to remain muted when not speaking. I know even I sometimes still forget that how many years has it been now that we've been utilizing this virtual space, and still sometimes I'm clumsy to unmute or mute. So it's okay. But just making sure that when you are not speaking that you are muted. And of course, when speaking, ensure that your meeting space is free of those noises and sounds that we talked a little bit about earlier. And then you can utilize these great features that are within Google Meet, such as the chat and polls and Q&A and raise hand. So as a participant, these are available to you. Again, just asking you to be mindful of the timing in which you utilize these different capabilities. Okay, so now let's look at the different platforms that we have access to and some of those features as well. And you'll notice that, so on this particular slide, I've got Zoom meetings linked and I've got Google Meet linked. These will take you to that platform's information page. But then the last bulleted item under each one of these particular platforms, there is an accessibility features page that I have linked to as well, if you're interested in learning more about those accessibility features. But some of the highlights here for Zoom meetings support for screen readers, support for manual captioning, live automated captioning, can be used by ASL interpreters. ASL, American Sign Language, has keyboard shortcuts, excuse me. And then again, as I said, Zoom accessibility features is hyperlinked here and will take you to their accessibility page for more info. And then we have Google Meet, which we all primarily use. And of course, many of the same features that we see with Zoom also exist with Google Meet. That's support for screen readers, the live automated captioning, of course, and transcripts for both as well. That's not mentioned here, my apologies, but transcripts are also available. And then can be used by ASL interpreters and has keyboard shortcuts. And then once again, those accessibility features are highlighted for Google Meet if you'd like to click on that and learn more about the features. Two others here on this platform features slide, which include Microsoft Teams and GoToMeetings. GoToMeetings, not recommended. Not very many accessibility features here for that particular platform, and I'm not quite sure anyone really uses that particular platform anymore. However, it's worth mentioning because it is utilized in some spheres still. And then jumping back up to Microsoft Teams, we have many of the same features listed again. That support for screen readers, live automated caption, can be used by ASL interpreters, and of course has keyboard shortcuts. So if you're interested, please feel free to peruse those feature lists for each of the platforms. And if you do have any questions, please let me know. And now I'd like to hop into screen sharing and demonstrations. This is the final component of the presentation today. And I'm screen sharing as well right now. So it's important to think about a few things here when screen sharing. So let's take a look at that. So on this screen, it says, while virtual meeting platforms differ in the placement and types of controls available to users, most offer similar screen sharing features for both hosts and attendees. And so screen sharing by default, virtual meeting platforms only display the visual elements selected by the person sharing their screen. So you want to speak as if the meeting is being conducted by a teleconference, for example, and again, verbally describing that visual content. And for Google Meet, I found that it's best to share a tab instead of your whole screen. That's just a better experience, especially if you want to share audio as well. You want to make sure you use that tab functionality when sharing instead of your full screen. And then screen sharing with audio. So many of the virtual meetings have included a feature that allow a presenter who is sharing their computer screen, of course, to share audio from their computer. So I just kind of touched on this with Google Meet. This is helpful when the presenter is sharing a video. So presenters should mute their microphone when shared audio is playing to avoid causing that dreaded echo. So don't be afraid to share that audio, just making sure, again, you share via tab if in Google Meet and that your microphone is muted when sharing that audio. And then thinking about screen sizes too. So keep in mind that folks may be joining your meeting utilizing different devices that have different size screens. So thinking about how your presentation may render, for example, on a mobile device. There's a good way to just check that out yourself. You can create a meeting and just join it yourself and share and test it out on a couple of different screen sizes to see what it looks like. Again, this is just really making sure that you're inclusive of your audience here. And then you want to avoid flashing, right? Because this can cause seizures by flickering, and it can be a little bit overwhelming as well. So you want to avoid that in presentations if at all possible. And then, as I said, we have all of these great resources. We have our OIT accessibility website. We have that how-to accessible meetings using Google Meet that I referenced earlier. We have a plain language guide here linked. Google Slides, that links to a presentation that was done earlier by Brian Stafford on our team, giving you a whole host of good tidbits on how to make those slides accessible. We have a PDF here from CDHS, Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deafblind Virtual Meeting website and social media accessibility guidelines. Ensuring accessibility when using virtual platforms guide, that is also provided by CDHS, and then a W3C resource on remote meetings to round us out with the resources.